Good afternoon. So I'm Nick Mothershaw, Chief Identity Strategist at the Open Identity Exchange, so I'll introduce myself. I'm going to talk today about how our approach to, more broadly, identity and digital trust fits into age assurance. This is a precursor to a new model we're coming out with in May, which will more discreetly separate out things like age assurance, assurance for the purposes of AML, employment checking into separate use case-based uses under the overall banner of digital trust, of which digital identity is one use. So I'm going to talk to you about who we are, what digital ID and proof of age, and how those two things fit together, how we see them working together. Briefly talk about governments and wallets. We released a paper on that last year, and then talk in a bit more detail about interoperability across frameworks. So one of the things we're looking at in detail is, this is great. We can get these things working in individual countries or jurisdictions. How do we make these identities, this trust, work across different ecosystems in cross-border interactions? So we are a members community. We are a not-for-profit. We work on behalf of our members to drive forward the cause, if you like, of digital identity. So what is it? How does it work? How does it need to evolve? What does good look like? How is it governed? And we tend to focus on the policy end of this, but we look at the whole framework, the whole requirement. There's a lot of people who solve the individual technical elements. We're pretty unique. No, you can't say pretty unique. We are unique in our view, looking across the whole of the framework area and including the policy elements. So our vision is that we can all have a trusted identity that proves who we are and what we can do, be that enter into employment, travel, buy alcohol at a bar, and that works all over the world, wherever we go. So we don't need to get a new one when we get to a new place. It should all be interoperable. We influence this through thought leadership. So we run working groups, we publish papers, we go to conferences and speak about that and influence the involvement of trust frameworks. We influence directly in terms of governments. We have a lot of dialogue with the team at DCIT in the UK, with the EU, with the teams at NIST. We're just entering into an MOU with the team over at DIAC in Canada. We're working closely with the Thai Trust Framework, Singapore. So we influence how they evolve their respective frameworks, formally through consultation responses and informally through dialogue and sharing the output of our working groups. And then we promote. So all this is great stuff, but what is this thing called digital identity? Nobody got up this morning and thought, I've got to go and get me a digital identity today, top of my list. People get this information and establish identity and trust when they need a service that needs it. So we need to educate users that this thing is happening, it's becoming a useful utility for them, and we need to educate. Where we focus principally is relying parties, the people who consume the identity from the user, on what is this thing called a reusable digital identity. Why is it okay? Why is it safe? What's the advantages? So that's looking at the spread of our do, and we're doing loads in this space at the moment. So we're running a global interoperability working group. I'm going to drill into that later. We've been looking at governments and wallets. We're rewriting our own framework that we publish on our website for wallets. Coming up with a new 4-layer model, which we're going to launch in May. We've been looking at commercial models and how they're going to change as we move from the world of many countries have got established digital identities today, but what are we going to be doing in future around different commercial models for wallets? And we, in that respect, work with the Open Wallet Foundation on what they're doing around open source code for wallets. We've done a lot of work on fraud. The latest thing was fraud signals. We look at digital ID ecosystems and we see that fraudsters will be all over them. We've seen a lot earlier this afternoon around deepfakes and fraudster infiltration. How are we going to manage that? How are we going to share information about fraudsters and stop that? So we're very well detecting it, but we need to shut them down and we need to work together collaboratively to do that. So how are we going to do that? And we do a lot of work on inclusion as well. It's great to see a presentation this morning on vouching. We've done a lot of work around vouching and digital vouching, how that might work. And we've been looking at telco data in that respect, for instance. We influence heavily consultation responses. We run our own member events. We've been at 8, 9 conferences now, including this one in the last few months. For our members, we do a marketing news and roundup. So if you're a member, you get from us a kind of bi-weekly feed of summarised news with our views on it. And we've been in the UK here various all-party parliamentary group presentations to MPs and Lords to educate them and influence how they move the digital identity and trust world together. And on the adoption side, we, in collaboration with the Government Digital Service, produced 12 videos that have been released since Christmas. They educate on different aspects of ID. You can play them end to end as a kind of full education on what is digital ID and why is it okay, or you can play each of them individually, and they tackle topics like fraud, privacy, biometrics, inclusion. So if you need a sound bite just to say, oh, what's going on with biometrics in digital ID, why are they okay, why are they used properly, we've got one, and it'll be about a minute long, 2 minutes long. It's a really good kind of prompt in terms of why, how digital ID works. And then we've just done a set of interviews and released the paper on that. We did 12 interviews. And what we found was 12 different opinions on what digital ID is and what should happen, and this was across various different sectors. So we found a very disparate set of views, which tells us we need to do a lot more of this in terms of education and adoption. So how does this fit into digital proof of age? So apologies for the smallness of the diagram. Maybe you can see it on that screen over there as well. But this is our kind of stock diagram of what a digital ID looks like. It's a container full of digital credentials. It could be a wallet. Most people, when they think of wallets, think of something that's housed on the phone. We like to think of it more as a container that may be on the phone, it might be in the cloud, it should be able to exist on both, that enables the user to manage their digital life. And in that, I'm going to have credentials such as an ID card, if my state issues one to me digitally. Maybe my driving license, my passport, bank cards, loyalty cards, education information, visas, health information. I'm going to start collecting all of this information digitally into my wallet. And from that, various proofs are derived. So there's an important distinction here between a digital credential, which is a fact about me and may contain some very rich data, and a proof in which we would categorize the over 18 proof. That's a data minimized proof for a particular purpose, and there are many other proofs for different purposes that we also would recognize as well. So the user can collect their credentials together and then share them with acceptors, or relying parties as they're often referred to. The user is in control of all of this. They choose who to share their credential with. They can track that and trace it. They could have one wallet with everything in it. They could have several wallets or different aspects of their lives. That choice is important. The credentials will be verified by an authoritative source and issuer, so that these are trusted credentials. They're not self-instantiated scans of passports. They are passports that have been verified to a standard. And specialist proofs are then derived from that for particular purposes, age being one of them, but we also look at levels of assurance as a particular proof type. So in the UK, you've got levels of confidence. In the EU, you've got levels of assurance. In the US, you've got the IALs. All of those are a form of derived proof from other information that the user has. And when we've unpacked that, I'll come on to that in a minute, that's how all of the frameworks actually work. So we're now doing some education across the frameworks. You will actually do this in the same way, and you can therefore be interoperable in a way that perhaps you hadn't even thought about. If I take out some of those credentials that are in the bucket there and just focus on the over 18 one, not everything is going to be fit for purpose to prove that I'm over 18. My loyalty card hasn't really been checked that it belongs to me. My tickets are entry forms to events. They're not trusted credentials that would be enabled for an age assurance. So there will be a set of credentials, and if you look at the Ofcom list in the UK, they're essentially listing different credentials or sources of credential that are acceptable for proof of age. And then from those credentials, I can derive the fact that this person is over 18. And the rules for that will vary by jurisdiction. And this identity will need to understand that and adapt to them as it moves from place to place. And the rules are not as simple as you think. You might think, oh, over 18, that's easy. We just need to take the date of birth, minimize it down to over 18. That's it, job done. But actually, where's that coming from? What type of document is it coming from? who issued the document in what circumstances, how is the document bound to the user, and all of that becomes important in the trust standard. So and I've picked out a few core things here that go into this thing I've got across the bottom called a trust framework, and we're all about trust frameworks. So all of these things and more need to come together for a successful age assurance assertion to be made. So we need to know, is the wallet, is the container that all of this is trusted? How is that happen? It happens because it complies with standards. It is certified, as we just heard, as in a process. So we can see that we've got a certified container, a certified wallet that is holding these elements. What about the credentials that are in it? How are they trusted? Why are they trusted? Who are they issued from, and how? Is that traceable back? Are they signed digitally so that we can trace them back to the issuer? How do we then proof the individual? How do we extract their 18 plus? What can we extract it from? How long does that stay valid for? What happens if a credential is revoked? How does that affect the 18 plus element? So the proofing rules get quite complex quite quickly. Then what goes in the proof itself? So what is presented? Is it just over 18? Is it 18 in the location where the user is at the time? Is it 18 in the location and the person who asked for it, because we've read that as part of the interaction, so it's played back as a security feature, a unique code so that we can trace this and track it for auditability purposes. And when it's presented at the top there, what authenticators are used to do that? So when I present a proof of age, the PASS standard says I need to use my face or a biometric to prove it's me. At that point, the theatre of presenting is I look at my phone, I trigger it, and I present it back. So that's another important element. But how does the user know all of this is actually going to work, and how do they understand this is in place? So that's where trust marks come in. PASS is a trust mark. Other trust marks are available and are emerging around the world. But the user needs to know that this is in play, and they need to know that the person they're presenting to is also genuine and trustable. It isn't trying to get data from them to use for nefarious purposes or sell them fake services. So all of these things to come together, there are actually 41 elements to a trust framework in our model to make digital trust work. And in proof of age, I've pulled out some of the examples there. So we work across all of that. We don't write standards, we influence those who do. We don't write frameworks, we influence those who do. So we're all about where is this going next, the thought leadership around it, and influencing the direction of the whole market for the benefit of our members, who are identity providers by and large, but ultimately for the user, who will benefit massively from this ease of use of a reusable identity. So a couple of topics that to drill into. Governments and wallets. So you've heard that the EU is doing UD wallets. They are requiring that each member state makes available to citizens who want one a UD wallet that contains the personal identifiable data about the individual, the PID, that has been proofed by the government. That means, by and large, the governments are going to deliver that ecosystem. They're going to deliver a wallet to their citizen. We thought about that and thought, is that a good idea? And for a number of reasons, we decided it's probably not. Governments are not the best provider of a wallet. The wallet that sits in my pocket here, containing various things, payment credentials, tickets, receipts, all this, it has one government credential in it, does not come from my government. And that's, as we move to electronic wallets, why should they come from government? In fact, there's a number of concerns about them coming from government. Governments are not the best tech provider. They might get me a wallet that works day one, but are they going to innovate? Are they going to evolve? Are we going to get stuck in legacy ruts with governments issuing wallets? What do I think about the government watching what I do if it's providing me the wallet? As much as the government might assure me that it's not, if it's the provider of the wallet, I'm going to probably think they are or can. And I also know the law means they can. So we advocate that governments are probably not the best providers of wallets. They will do it. The UK government is talking about doing it for the purpose of public sector, but we think private sector wallets are a better approach. Government should focus on issuing trusted credentials into wallets that they themselves certify and trust, and enabling private sector to manage the wallets, innovate around that. And in our next iteration of what we're doing, you'll see another box at the far end of this that talks about use cases like age and AML, and why specialisms around those use cases are well away from what a government can do with a wallet. So we've got a paper on that. If you look on our website, you can find out more about that. We've also been doing a lot of work around interoperability and how do we make these wallets or IDs work seamlessly across borders. So we thought we'd better have a look at how things work today. We've analysed 8 different framework schemes or implementations. We started with the UK, and then moved on to the EU and the US. By that point, we'd got an outline analysis set of the common characteristics of those 3 frameworks. So we then moved on to a questionnaire approach with the following 5: Canada, Sweden, Thailand, Singapore, and MOSIP. So we now have these 8 different frameworks or implementations, policies analysed and categorised into, on the published version, it was 75 different characteristics which have up to 289 possible values. And as we did that analysis, the kind of graph of different values steadied off. And we don't think it's ever going to completely steady off, but what it showed us is actually they do these things in different ways, and necessarily different ways because they've got different policy approaches. But we were starting to realise that there are only so many different ways they do things, which means if we understand that, we can understand how we might achieve interoperability across those different frameworks without saying to frameworks, you all need to coalesce into one common mega framework, because any suggestion of that is not met well by any of these countries who are necessarily defining their own framework to meet their own legislation. So this is about understanding differences and working with them and interoperating through those and around those, not about normalisation. It will help normalisation, and we're already seeing frameworks use what we've done to evolve where they're going next. So we've got areas that some frameworks haven't addressed. When they are now addressing them, they're looking at what the other 7 frameworks have done in the way we've presented it, and they can easily decide, well, which direction do we want to go. So what we found here was what we called the DNA of digital identity. And the reason we called it that is because this strip here was at one stage our analysis with all these different coloured breakdown, and it looked, I zoomed out on it at one point to show the scale of it, and then we thought actually it looks a bit like one of the DNA colour strips that you see with the different DNAs. That's where that came from. But it was a good analogy because what we found is they all address these same 15 common policy areas containing 75 common characteristics. But within that, there are 289 different values. So they are the same species, but they have different value settings, which makes them all individual. So the DNA analogy seemed to work quite well. We are now moving towards publishing that. We're tidying it up, making it more presentable, making sure it's all understandable. We hope to publish that around May time. The other thing we found was that on the identity assurance policy module, a specific digital identity feature, that 5 of them out of the 8 had this published. And actually all 5 do the same thing. They follow this methodology. They talk about accepted credentials. For the 3 that didn't have this, they have it because they actually have the same model, but the accepted credential is one thing. It's the national ID card for the user that gets digitized. And so they skip everything else and just say, right, we make that now a digital version. But where that doesn't exist, in places like the UK, US, in the EU, we have this more complex model that says, I accept things like passports, driving licenses, bank accounts as credentials for proof of identity. I validate them in different ways. I might scan them, I might take photos, selfies, cross-match, I might read NFC chips. I then combine those in increasing steps around trust or risk mitigation, and out of that comes some kind of level of assurance. There's a formula they put together. And actually the way they do the formula is pretty consistent when you break it down. So we now, on one sheet, have for 5 different frameworks, how you take their method combinations and add them up to their levels of assurance. And we're looking to work with frameworks on this on the premise that basically, if you've got any one of these 5 what we call the golden credentials in your wallet, you probably need 2 of them in most cases, but you should be able to achieve an LOA in what we call a destination framework. So rather than, as we saw the EU-US analysis recently, try to map their IALs to LOAs and work out the differences, what we're saying is actually throw that away, go back to the fact that both of those processes work off a set of base credentials, work out what credentials the user's got, and reformulate the level of assurance you need for your local purpose. So as part of that, it meant recognizing there were standards required for validation and verification methods. They do them in subtly different ways, but we managed to categorize those into 8 validation and 8 verification methods within these broad headings. But we do need some more standards behind that. And what this will do then is enable roaming wallets. So I can take my wallet that is minted here in the UK, full of credentials that are minted here in the UK. I can get on a plane, I can get to the US, and I can try and use that in a situation in the US. And some of the credentials will work because they're recognized internationally. Not all of them, and some of them aren't relevant, but some of the core ones will still work. And from those core ones, the level of assurance required in the US, the IAL 2 or 3, can be derived without worrying about what level of assurance I've got in the UK. That doesn't matter. What matters is the trusted credentials I bring to the US and what they mean within the US system. So we're working with our partners on that as we move forward. And we're creating this working title, the OSET, Open Criteria Exchange Tool, to enable this information to be exchanged both in a tool that can be used for comparison, so a desktop tool, but also a machine readable format. So this can be shared in machine readable format. And at Identiverse in a few weeks' time, we'll be showing some sequence diagrams and wallet journeys as to how this might work and come together in a mix of policy decisions followed by machine readable information. If you want to know more about that, it's in our library. If you scan that QR code, that will take you to a link to our publication on that. And this is very much the start of a journey that we're on here around interoperability. What we've seen recently is the G7 has said we need to do analysis of our frameworks. We've done 6 out of the 7 already. The only one we haven't done is Japan because it wasn't published at the time. There is now one. We need it translating, or we need a partner to do that with us, and we'll add that. So we've already done the core of this in our way, in our style, and we're sharing that now with those frameworks as at least a start point for the work the G7 has now demanded they all do. So if you're interested in what we do, if you want to take part, you can join as a member. I reiterate, these are the things we're doing at the moment. We continue to drive on all of these thought leadership fronts. We're going to be doing more on inclusion in the second half of the year as we turn our focus back to that. We're going to be doing more on adoption. A working group on that has met this morning, has come up with some really great ideas on focusing on problem areas to educate, and really drilling into that through a series of workshops to take that out to the market and work out what the fears are around fraud and how do we address them and make sure they are removed. So if you're interested, give me a shout, join us. Membership's open to all, and it'd be great to get you on board as part of the process. If you just want to know what we're doing, go to the website. Everything with this, the clues in the name, open. At the end, whatever we do is published in an open way. So you can consume the papers in our library down there, and there's a guide to trust frameworks which you can drill into different aspects and look at things like liability and trust rules and see what our thoughts are on that. So that's me. A couple of minutes for questions. Any questions? Yeah. George, isn't it? Yeah. George.
Hi, I'm George Billinge, Illuminate Tech. I was wondering if you have any opinions on who should be responsible for developing overlay schemes for the trust framework, because that's a question I'm not 100% sure on at the moment. As I think was mentioned earlier, if we want age assurance to be included within the digital identity attributes and trust framework, we kind of need that overlay scheme, but whose job should it be to actually produce that? Thanks.
So I think the first part of that is we need to clearly understand what an overlay or supplementary scheme is, what its scope is and what its purpose is. I'm not sure that's fully clear in the framework at the moment. We've been doing a lot of work on making sure that's understood and what the boundaries are. What I would want to see is different use cases will need different schemes, so that people come together to create a scheme for that use case. How that is done will depend on the scenario, I think, because in some cases you've got someone like PASS who are already doing that, they're already funded. In other cases, there is nobody present, there is no funding to solve that at the moment, so people are going to have to come together to do that in innovative ways. The administration of them, by definition, is open, though. You know, if you read the framework, it says whatever those people do, it is published, it must be published. So it can't be a kind of closed ecosystem of proprietary approaches. It's got to be open and it's got to be available to all. Yeah. We better move on, I think. We've got Tony, he's on next. Not yet. No, go. Thank you.